Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Aminoff Effect. We have today Tom Del Beccaro, candidate for United States Senator in the state of California. We're going to talk to Tom about his positions on various issues and discuss with him why it is we should be voting for him for United States Senator and not another candidate.
How are you, Gary? Great to see you.
Good to see you. Welcome to the Aminoff Effect.
I love it. I love the title of your show. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks. Glad to have you here. So, Tom, you're running for the office of United States Senator to replace Barbara Boxer. Why don't you take a minute and give the viewers a little background about you and your history?
Sure. I've been involved in politics a long time. I'm a small business attorney also for 28 years, so I'm in the problem-solving business. I also write for Forbes. I write history books. I wrote a book called The Divided Era, which explains how ever larger government is dividing us these days. But my main focus when it comes to politics is getting people to understand, Gary, that right now our economy is stagnated. That leads to bad things. There's a reason it's stagnated, and it's largely because government is taking too big a bite out of the apple. And the reason why I'm running for this office is to bring about pro-growth policies for California and for the country.
Fantastic. Very good. So you did publish a book called The Divided Era.
Yeah, I didn't publish it, but it was last year. In fact, almost a year ago exactly, May 26th, it came out. And what I was trying to get people to understand, because people often ask, why is there so much fighting in politics? And the simple answer is because there's a lot to fight about. And what I mean by that is from the city council level all the way to the federal level, our government spends $6 trillion a year. $6 trillion. And they're doing countless things. And every time government makes a decision, there's someone on one side of it, or many, and someone on the other side, and then the third set of people are the people who have to pay for it. And so that creates a competition for the spoils, creates a competition not to be taxed, and the more things that government does, the more of those divisions you see. So a government that does 100 things will find 100 competitors. A government that does $6 trillion worth finds constant competitors. And so I wrote the book so people understand that the larger government grows, the more divisions that will occur.
I see. I noticed that you signed a pledge not to increase taxes.
Sure.
How many other of your competitors have signed that pledge?
Of the major competitors, none. And really, people need to understand, this is an important question, because what I just a minute ago mentioned, this $6 trillion in spending, right? That's about 36% of the economy. If you add in regulatory costs, you know, all the federal regulations and the cost of our response, that brings the total government burden, as I call it, to almost 50% of the economy. So how much more government do we need? The left says we need a bit more spending. Really. If government spending was going to solve our problems, we should be in heaven by now, shouldn't we?
That's right.
And so we either get an understanding that you can't continue to grow government. You know, if you look at Europe today, they're all above 50% on that scale I just described for you, and they have 1 or 2% growth. And they have underclasses in Spain. I know you know this. They have unemployment. If you're under 30 years old, your unemployment is above 33%, and you get farther and farther behind. Because the bigger the bite it takes, the smaller the private sector remains, the lower the growth. And so the reason why I take the no new tax pledge is twofold. One, we can't be making government bigger, but two, they have record revenues, Gary, and yet they have still a $600 billion deficit. I don't know anyone who thinks that if we sent more money to Washington, they would actually finally balance the budget. I don't think that's the case.
So our growth over the past decade has been the lowest in the history of the country. We've been growing at 2% a year or less.
Yeah, 1.6 over the last 7 years.
So economists say we really need at least 3% a year to have prosperity. So to what do you attribute this low growth?
Yeah, I think we need about 3.5%. It is going back to this total government burden concept, because if you take too much out of the private sector, you leave it, like a plant without enough water. And so once you get much above 30%, either government spending, taxes, and the regulatory costs I described, you begin to curtail your long-term growth prospects. So like I said, for the last 2 decades, Europe's been above 50%, and their growth rates have been historically 1-2%, certainly over the last decade. They've had spikes here and there, but really their long-term growth prospects are really low. The same thing's happening to us. And what that means for a country of 350 million approximately people is when you have 1.7% growth, you have this unemployment. We have 98 million people not working. And because the government's taking such a big bite, you don't expect a big uptick. We need to grow the private sector. There's only one way to grow the private sector, and let's let people keep their own money through tax reform and regulatory reform.
So you're one of the only candidates I'm aware of that's running for the Senate that has proposed a new tax plan, a flat tax.
Yeah, I'm very specific. I think if you want someone to follow you, you should probably tell them where you're going. And so Stephen Moore, my economic advisor, and myself, we worked out a flat tax for the California and for the country, 15.5% net business income. This is a really simple system. You take in, or you look at all the money you've taken in, you look at every check you've written, and the difference is how much you made, and 15.5%, no more paying accountants to figure out what your taxes are. And for individuals, 15.5% as well. We get rid of the death tax. Family of 4 doesn't pay income tax until it gets above $48,000. Now the reason why tax reform is so important is because the current system with 77,000 annotated pages is a monument to lobbyists, big companies, and corporate welfare. They're doing fine by it, and it hurts growth. And so we need to restore economic growth, because that's what's key to the middle class. You need an expanding economy. No targeted tax cuts, no bills designed to put them more dependent on government. You want the private sector growing so that their wages can rise.
And does your flat tax also apply to corporations?
Yeah, absolutely. So corporation, small business, 15.5, any business, 15.5% net business. So no more depreciation schedules. If you write a check for $20,000 for a vehicle, that's your deduction for that year. If the next year you write $20,000, that's your deduction. What that does is accelerate all of your expenses, encourages business to buy things, and when business buys things, that's when the economy expands. Curiously enough, the Democrats often agree to accelerated depreciation as a means to get the economy going. Well, this accelerates it all into the first year.
Yeah. So it's more of a cash basis plan.
Yes, absolutely. How most people operate. The goal is to get the government neutral when it comes to income. You don't want government saying one particular business activity is better than another, because that leads to corruption. Big government means buying government. The bigger the government, the more the money, the buying of it. So we want to get government out of that and create a level playing field and let people make business decisions. As a small business attorney, all the time people come in my office with their dreams to set up a company or acquire a company or do a particular business deal. And one of the first things I always have to ask a new person is, who's your accountant? Because what does the IRS say about your dreams? We need to get rid of that and let them spend money because it makes business sense, not because it makes tax sense.
So a drop in the tax rate is likely to encourage businesses to take risks and expand.
Absolutely.
And make capital improvements.
Yeah, we have to restore the incentives. We've had 4 major tax reforms in our history in the 20s, the 60s after the suggestion from JFK, under Reagan, and just over a decade ago. Each time the economy was weak, and as you mentioned, the money wasn't being put at risk. In fact, in the 20s, a huge amount of money was in cash. Tax-free municipal bonds meant government was paying people because the tax rate at the top was 77%. So they said, why should we take risk if we don't get that much a return? And each of those 4 times people said, oh, if you cut taxes, it's going to help the rich and it'll take money from the government, right? All 4 times the economy rebounded, all 4 times wages went up, the middle class expanded, and even tax revenues went up, because when more people are working, they're paying taxes, and they're okay with that as long as they have a job.
Yeah. So have you calculated under your tax plan how that would affect total revenues coming into the U.S.?
Sure. The first 2 years, it actually results in less revenues. And then over time, it relates to more revenues than the current system. And that's by design. Because if you want the private sector to expand from its current position, then you have to leave more money there and encourage people to spend it. And then when people do that, and then they have a prospect of greater return in the years ahead, they'll go back into it. The analogy I use is if you were walking along the street and you found a $50 bill, you would probably spend that $50 bill thinking this is my lucky day. But you wouldn't think that you were going to find $50 every day and spend your other money in that regard. But when you do have a tax cut, that gives you that expectation. And people who think they're going to have money in the future spend more than people who think they will have less money in the future.
Good point. Good point. So, your flat tax plan has been endorsed
by the titans of economics, or pro-growth economics, including Art Laffer, Steve Forbes, Larry Kudlow, and Stephen Moore. In fact, I'm the only U.S. Senate candidate, or actually any candidate in America, who's had their support like that.
So a big problem we experience in California today is drought.
Yeah.
Which I call water management. Many say that the drought in California is not due to the lack of rain, but due to the way it's been managed.
Yeah.
Do you concur in that?
Yeah, we have a man-made water crisis. And it goes kind of like this. You know, California generally has 1 good year of rain, 2 or 3 mediocre years, and a couple of bad years. Now, if you made income that way, and knew that 1 year you're going to make a lot and then the next 3 or 4 would be less, you would save the money from the first year for the non-rainy day,
right,
in this example. And so California actually has enough rainfall if it was properly managed, right? We actually don't have a lack of water. We have too many environmentalists. So here's what we would need to do. Unquestionably, the easy thing is to look and see, well, you should store more water, and certainly we should. Down the street at Carlsbad, we see a new desalination plant. Places like Israel, Australia, and Singapore, where I went to law school and first saw this in 1986, water crisis that is, they built these plants and have stabilized their economies. Because of it, we should do the same. But there's other things we should do as well. Most people don't know that 50% of the water in this state that we catch and control, we send directly out to the ocean. We don't even use it for human purposes or for manufacturing, farming, or otherwise. Why such a high number? Because the environmentalists literally don't want us to have the water, because they think if you do that, more people will move here. That's not their goal. It costs, on the other hand, tens of thousands of jobs and poverty in this state, and that's why I'm against that policy. So this is one of those things that can be fixed. Doesn't have to be an ideological battle. You know, here in Los Angeles, there's 1.3 billion, I think, is the number, in a backlog of fixing broken municipal pipes. That's a jobs program in and of itself. That leaks a tremendous amount of water. Some studies show that the amount of old pipes leak as much water as all the residential use combined, yet there's no plan to fix them. We shouldn't have high-speed rail. We should be putting people to work to fix those pipes and ending this water mismanagement crisis.
So the water company complains that it's going to take billions of dollars to repair those pipes, and they don't have the funds to do it. So,
yes, in part that is true. So why are we spending money then on high-speed rail, something that would be a luxury at best and it's old technology, when we could be allocating it otherwise. Part of that is their own fault. I mean, they should have their own maintenance schedule, and we shouldn't let them off the hook for that. But we definitely need to identify the sources of the problem at the very least. Again, there is enough water that falls. There is enough water that comes within our control. It's the policy decision makers that are making the decision not to get it to where people and farming is.
And you're saying it's possible to do
Yeah,
that?
it's very possible. Just think of this. Healthy forest practices. And what that means is we have overgrown forests that present fire risks. And then they do have these massive fires, which takes a lot of water to put them out. But if we thin the forest, put people to work, help solve our job crisis, then those forests would have dramatically more runoff because they wouldn't have the same root structure that requires so much water. We have so much forest land in this state. You could talk to some who say it's enough to feed the Central Valley each year. So why don't we put people to work and increase runoff, kill two birds with one stone?
Are you suggesting the government?
Well, certainly the healthy forest practices is something that falls under the National Forest Service. And yes, they should hire people to make those forests safer, increase runoff, which will lead to more jobs and more tax revenue. Not that my goal is to get more tax revenue, but it is a secondary effect to managing water and our forests successfully.
So we don't really need to be in this drought if the water were managed properly.
We don't need to be in a water crisis, that's for sure.
So people talk about an unemployment rate of 5%.
Yeah, quite the most misleading number in economics today.
So explain that.
Well, what really matters is the percentage of your population that is working, and ultimately what matters is the percentage of your population that is reliant on government. So let's talk about the unemployment rate is been changed over the years to reflect those who are unemployed but are currently working for a job. And so someone who gives up and says I can't get a job and is stuck on welfare for an extended period of time suddenly becomes no longer unemployed. They're certainly not employed, right? So the true figure really is above 10%. By the way, here in California, because of the drought unemployment or water crisis unemployment, you have towns in the Central Valley with still unemployment above 33%. Overall, there's nearly 100 million Americans not working. And then there's the other issue of how many are relying on government, and this is a really startling number for people to hear for the first time, in that we have a third of Americans on means-tested welfare, meaning you have to qualify, but you're on welfare. You have 22 million people or more now working for government. You have Social Security, you have Medicare, and then you have all the government contractors. So from a McDonnell Douglas to a local paper supply company, that puts the figure over 50%. That's unsustainable. We need to, again, expand the private sector, get people back to work, and shrink that 1/3 number, and then reform some of these other programs, or we're going to go the way of Detroit.
The whole country.
Yeah.
So let's talk about foreign policy for a moment.
I know that's near and dear to your heart.
It is. So do you feel that the current administration's foreign policy is effective in helping the U.S.?
No, actually, and I know we've talked about this before, foreign policy is different than domestic policy. You and I could, argue about water policy all day long. We can go into the nuances of it. But foreign policy as practice is very different because take you, for instance. I know you're very tied into what goes on in Los Angeles area politics. You know what goes on in state politics, and you know national politics. But you're probably not as caught up on Zimbabwe policies, right? Well, the other way around is the rest of the world knows their local politics quite well, but they know of America, but they only see and hear it now and then. And so the reason I bring this up is it's very important for a leader and a country to act clearly so that people understand where it stands, because if you're only going to hear from them now and then, you have to act with clarity so that they know where you stand. And that hasn't been the case at all. You don't draw red lines and run over them. You don't equivocate. John Kerry, not that many months ago, said he saw the rationale for the first Paris terrorist acts. Okay, rationale. That tells, remember, everything he says gets translated.
Right.
What's another word for rationale? The reason.
Right.
And then you get a headline somewhere that says America sees reasons for terrorism.
Right.
As opposed to speaking with moral clarity like a Reagan did. So step one, we clearly need a new president, because this president isn't going to be good at this, and a reputation is easier maintained than recovered. Well, he lost his, and he'll never be able to recover it. So someone new has to come in and speak with moral clarity. They need to say what ISIS is. This refusal to call them Islamist terrorists confuses our allies because they're on the front line, and encourages our enemies because they think we're weak. So we need a new president, we need to speak with moral clarity, and then we need to help our allies. Because when Jordan went to fight ISIS, they shouldn't have run short of bullets. We also need to reset our relationship with Turkey. We have tried to integrate Turkey into NATO. Obviously, they're within NATO, but they have a different interest with respect to ISIS, Gary. ISIS isn't as big a deal to them as it is to the Kurds, us, the Jordanians, or even the Syrians. And we have held back arming the Kurds because of our relationship with Turkey. That's been a bad thing because it's allowed ISIS to expand and then project power and get a lot of money. So we need to have some straight talk with Turkey. Talk Turkey with Turkey, I guess you could say. And we need to help the Kurds, and we need to eliminate ISIS.
Illegal immigration is a major concern today. Some say there may be as many as 20 million illegal immigrants in the country, with more coming in every day. There have been many attempts at resolving it, Gang of Eight, all of these attempts at comprehensive immigration solution. What is your take on immigration and how? I'm talking about illegal immigration.
Yeah, sure. You know, I don't think Washington's going to solve it, sadly, because their current model of addressing issues like this is this comprehensive legislation model, which is really a special interest boondoggle. They become spending bills. I mean, look at Obamacare, 2,500 pages of special interest. And I don't think we can wait any longer for something like that in any case, especially after San Bernardino. Indeed, I say that anything you thought about immigration before 9/11 and before San Bernardino, you need to rethink. Because it's not just an issue of who's crossing the border, perhaps to work. It is now an issue of national security. And so I think it's time for a different approach. And I think the Republicans should recast the entire debate around national security, because that is a unifying message, right? And what they should explain to the American people is that what's coming over the border is much greater than just someone coming to work. Heroin interdictions on the southern border are up 300%. Methamphetamine is up 500%, right? The number of those from Afghanistan, that's a long way to come, is up. The number of Syrians is up. But it isn't just the southern border. In fact, the woman from San Bernardino, all she had to do was give a false address. She made up an address and got in the country. You know, in January, I tried to buy a jacket online from Macy's. And I put in my credit card, and it automatically switches to my computer gives it business address. My business address is the billing address. And you know what Visa said? You can't buy it. Wrong address. Are you telling me Visa could do a better job than our Visa system? So here's my plan. Abandon the comprehensive spending legislation. Do this piecemeal. Turn it to a national security discussion. And the Republicans before this election should put forth a visa reform bill. And what that bill says is, we'll give you 90 days to leave. And if at the end of 90 days you're still here, we've allocated money to go and find you. And if we have to catch you and send you home, then we're going to seize some of your assets and pay for the process. And we're going to let everyone know. And they should dare the president to stand against safety, because we've lost track of hundreds of thousands of visa overstays. And there's no other country on earth that you can do this. Try going to Russia and saying, I'm just going to hang out for 10 years.
Right.
It's not how you can't even get jobs. You can't do that. You can't go to Australia like that. If you overstay your visa, they fine you. They don't allow you to go get a job. And so Republicans should take this piecemeal approach, make it easier, and prove that government can actually keep us safe for once.
So the president authorized and Congress funded 300,000 Syrian immigrants.
Yeah. Meanwhile, vets don't get care in hospitals.
Yeah.
We should expand the people here, but not take care of those who kept us free. That's their rationale. I would not have moved that quickly. When the CIA director tells us that he can't vouch for the Syrian refugees, then I think we should take a pause. I mean, even our mothers used to say, safety first.
Right.
So this was a wedge political issue for him, as many things are, and I thought that it was a mistake moving that fast.
I agree. And I think national security is the real issue with respect to illegal immigration.
And it doesn't just affect our southern border. It affects our northern border, and it's only 360 miles from Canada to New York City, and the drug interdiction there is a big issue. The terrorists know that as well. We need to expand it and understand that for 2 centuries we had a kind neighbor to the north, a weak neighbor to the south, and 2 oceans that protected us. Mm-hmm. That's no longer the case, so we need to recognize that and make the country safer and bring us together around national security.
So I know you're a supporter of the Second Amendment.
Yeah, it's right there in the Constitution. I support the Constitution.
And have you been rated by the NRA? By the way?
I have the highest possible rating. In fact, of the 5 major candidates, Kamala Harris gets an F, the gun confiscator. Mm-hmm. Loretta Sanchez gets an F. Ron Unz didn't get rated, and Jeff Sondheim, in the last debate, challenged Loretta to seize more guns from people. And he's unrated as well. I'm the only one. I have an AQ rating, which is the highest possible for someone who isn't a current office holder.
Very good. So, the California legislature recently proposed 10 bills to control guns and ammunition.
Yeah. You know, Gary, Milton Friedman a long time ago said you should judge something not by its intentions, but by its effect. So one of those bills says if you make a homemade gun, and what you can do is you can buy parts or 80% less than it and bring it home, and then you can assemble it. And their new bill wants them to, the people to do that, to go apply and get a serial number at that point. Now, what criminal, because suppose, shouldn't this be about gun violence and crime? Tell me what criminal is going to go, I should go probably register this gun that I'm going to commit a crime with. No, it's just the opposite. They file off the numbers.
Yeah.
So this is just feel-good stuff for them that doesn't actually have an impact on crime. The two examples to look at is Chicago versus New York. In Chicago, they, quote, deal with gun violence by going after guns, making it very hard for law-abiding citizens to have guns. But the criminals kept theirs, and crime has gone up. Under Giuliani in New York, the target was, of course, criminal activity. And when you have less criminal activity, you have less gun violence, and it works pretty simply. That's what we should be doing. Taking guns from law-abiding citizens doesn't reduce crime. There's a big case to be made that it increases crime.
And how do you feel about no gun zones?
Well, that makes it big criminal zones, right? Now, look, that doesn't mean that I think people should be, arming up and going to school every day. It's not like we're advocating that type of thing. But if you advertise, let me put it this way. I have a nice home alarm system, right? I put a sign out there that says I got a home alarm system. That's called deterrence. If people think, oh, it's a risk going there if I want to commit a crime, then they don't go there.
Right.
And if you tell people you can go commit a crime here because no one will have a gun, not everywhere, but some places. And so that's just another, it's like a nuclear free zone. It's just another misguided notion that of intentions and public acts and not reality.
It seems like it's more of the feel-good kind of legislation that the left is famous for.
Yeah, absolutely. Hence Milton Friedman's not the intention, but judge it by its results.
So you must also be a supporter of the First Amendment.
All 27 amendments I currently support. Although I'm not a big proponent of the 16th Amendment, which is obviously the income tax.
No, right. So do you believe that speech or speakers should be shut down because what they say may be offensive to some?
Yeah. What is it, Orwell, who said that when those who speak the truth become are judged as the problem, you're on a bad pathway. And this is over and over again in history. There's been attempts to shout people down by those who want to control a certain debate, and then they become in power, and then they want to shut people down more and more. America existed because of its free press. We literally went from a colony to a republic because of our ability to speak freely. So freedom was created by freedom of speech. Once you start curtailing that, you're either going towards freedom or away from it. And we're going away from it.
How do you feel about a devout Christian who's a baker, who says, in my religion, I can't condone the marriage of same-sex people, and therefore, I don't feel like participating in the ceremony by baking a wedding cake?
This problem manifests itself in more ways than we realize. So let's take something very related to that. The Apple case. The government wanted Apple to tell them how to break into an Apple phone. How is that at all related to a baker and a cake? Because it's when government requires private acts on behalf of what the government wants, you're in a dangerous area. That's what Cuba is. That's what Russia is. So Apple committed no crime, didn't do anything wrong in the making of the product. The government wanted to force Apple to do something. When the government starts telling people how to live their lives in private transactions, and we crossed that Rubicon long ago, it's a slippery slope. So what's next? Who else could you tell had to do? There used to be signs, we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And America was built on that.
Right.
And now we're going too far. I don't recommend that people discriminate, but remember that the assumption of power by government is always accompanied by a big request for the public good. And the casualty of freedom is ignored at that point. And so here and there you might get some good things, but then you'll wake up one day with much less freedom.
That's right. So last Friday, there was a vote in the U.S. Senate, a body in which we hope you will be a party, in which the Senate passed a bill proposed by the Obama administration to put low-income government-subsidized housing in wealthy and affluent suburbs and exurbs. The intent was, or is, to bring Democrats into those areas because the suburban and exurban areas are primarily Republican. Democrats tend to congregate in the big cities, but Democrats don't have power out in the exurbs. So now the government has the right to put a government-subsidized low-income housing development in an affluent neighborhood, irrespective of the wishes of the residents in the area. Again, the government is telling us who our neighbors can be or should be. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, no, our founders never would have agreed that government. Look, our founders, Madison, Jefferson, Monroe, wouldn't even agree to spend money on the building of public roads because they said it wasn't enumerated. The federal government should not be in the business of deciding where people live. That should be their free association right. And given what we started this conversation with, that government is now nearly half of the economy, in 10, 15 years, Gary, at this growth rate, we won't have money to pay for Social Security, Medicare, interest on the debt, and maybe some left over for defense. We don't have the money to be spending on things like this, and I certainly would have voted against it.
I was surprised to see that 16 Republican senators voted for it.
Yeah, well, look, in the last 5 years, the debt run-up has come out of a Republican House, a lot of those bills.
Right.
So, and we've gone too far.
Yeah. So, some people say that two of the Democratic candidates running for the office of U.S. Senate are experienced in public service. Loretta Sanchez has been in government service for decades.
She points out 20 years. Sanchez does.
Kamala Harris, Attorney General of the state of California.
Yes, I think you should believe in their experience. It's proof that they want bigger government. It's proof that they want to confiscate your Second Amendment. It's proof that they don't get that we've gone too far. They want even more government. So we should recognize the meaning of their service and know that they're going to make things worse. And we should pick someone whose experience has been in solving problems as a small business attorney, but also we should pick someone who's made a career out of talking about why corporate welfare is so dangerous, why we need to grow the economy, at least someone who recognizes how important this issue is. And that's why I'm the only person to take the No New Tax Pledge, because of the people running, I'm the only one who said, hey, do you realize we're taking on water here and we can't keep doing that.
Tom Del Beccaro, you've explained why people should vote for you for senator, and I appreciate your coming here and talking to us.
Thanks so much. Please go to tomdel.com, TOMDEL.com, and help me out. And Gary, always a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Tom.